Hello, everyone. Welcome to the, I guess, post React.js, the documentary Q&A. We're going to have a super fun time. We are glad that you're here. If you're in chat right now, what are your thoughts on this documentary? It's just absolutely incredible. I think, so a friend of mine messaged me after they saw it live, and they're like, yeah, I kind of expected it to be like a little bit cheesy. Not so much because like they expected it to be bad, but just kind of documentaries about things that you're familiar with can feel a little bit odd or like uncanny and whatnot. And man, this was just absolutely amazing. The story is incredible. Seeing it all condensed, seeing all of the humans and like what they went through to get to this point is absolutely incredible. So anyway, I just wanted to start this off, give you a few kind of housekeeping things to keep in mind. We might repeat this kind of like throughout the time. We have about 45 minutes today, and we just want to get as many questions answered as possible. So the chat is for you. You can chat with each other, just kind of like say stuff, like be excited. We want to keep it positive. There's no need for a lot of, just kind of unnecessary, critique or judgment or whatever. This is a fun time. We're really excited to just talk about all of the things that happened and, just how much we enjoyed this documentary. So yeah, keep it positive. And then if you have a question that you like answered, just pop it in there and try to prefix it with like a question mark. And then we have Ida and Sean are going to mark those, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we have. 45 minutes isn't a ton of time, so we're going to do our best and kind of knock some of those questions out. We have, I hope we have everyone here today, but I'm just going to list off the cast and, whoever's here is here. But we have Adam Wolf, Andrew Clark, Christopher Chedeau, Dan Abramov, David Nolan, Lee Byron, Pete Hunt, Sebastian Mark Bogue, Shane O'Sullivan, Sophie Alpert, Tom Okino, Tony Caspero, and Ida Bekla, the filmmaker. Okay, repeat. We're glad you're here. This is awesome. Documentary was incredible. I'm just delighted to be here. Chat is for you. Just knock those praises out of the park. And if you have questions, mark them with like a question mark emoji or something like that. That'll help us identify which questions you want answered. And if you have a certain person that you want to direct that question to, include that as well. And we'll try to make sure that they get on stage to answer it. So first and foremost, I want to invite Ida to the stage so we can talk about, just real quick, talk about the process of making this documentary. Ida, this was absolutely incredible, and I just wanted to introduce everyone to you. You're the silent force behind this documentary, and I know that sometimes it can be kind of uncomfortable to talk about this stuff, but I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to hear from you about like why you selected this documentary and what some of your favorite parts were creating it.
Hi, first of all, hi everybody. I guess many people on our YouTube channel has been asking for the React documentary for years, actually. So I was just happy we could finally get around to doing it. And I think for me, like the coolest part of this story is just featuring the cast and how every single person was so important. When I first heard about React, it's such a big technology. I just assumed it was like Facebook had like ordered it to be made, basically. So yeah, that was really fascinating throughout this process to just find out like how it was really, as you saw in the documentary, it was really these few people that like pushed for it and fought for it all the way. So
I love that. I like the idea of Facebook ordering the React framework, just saying like, hey, this is what we want, go build it. And yeah, I think something that really struck me watching this, because I've had the privilege of seeing it a couple times now, something that just struck me is how like each person was critical for React to have happened. And it's like absolutely amazing to think like this thing that totally transformed the way that we do web development over these last 10 years was brought to life by just individual players saying like, oh, actually this is kind of cool. I thought it was weird, but it's kind of awesome actually.
Completely. And that's also what I really wanted to like showcase in the documentary. So I hope
Yeah.
people
Do you
back
have
then.
a favorite part? I know that you've been living and breathing this. Is there a part that just kind of like cracks you up or delights you every time you see it?
I guess the two, like the first JS Conf talk is like really a dramatic moment, and then I also really like the first React Conf. It's like the kind of
Yeah.
opposite of that. I think those
Love
are the
that. Love
ones.
that. Anything else you wanted to say before we kick off the Q&A with the cast?
No, just thanks to the cast mostly, and to you, and especially I want to shout out to Christopher because he was really supportive from the beginning, and I feel like he kind of convinced some of the other people to want to participate. So yeah, and just thanks for watching. We see every like and comment. So that's it.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And like, I totally agree with Christopher. I feel like Christopher Chedeau is has always been React's biggest hype person. And so, yeah. Actually, Christopher, you mind coming on real quick? I'd love to kind of follow that up with your involvement in this project specifically. But obviously, you were a huge part of making the first React Conf happen, and I'd love to know like kind of what it looked like behind the scenes for making this happen.
Yeah. So yeah, for making this happen, so Ida tried to like I think it was early last year, like in January, tried to like make this documentary happen, and so she basically tried to send like, hey, like a little blob, hey, I'm doing a documentary and everything, and to like a lot of the people that were like in the React community, and like basically like nobody answered. And at some point, she sent it to me, and I was like, oh my god, like this is the best thing ever. Like we should definitely like make a documentary. Like this would be so good. And so I started basically like convincing like all of the original people like one by one, hey, I think this is good, I think we should make it. And I also like so I'm like, a lot of people actually left Facebook that are part of this documentary, but I'm still at Facebook, now Meta. And so I also did all of the due diligence around like, hey, working with the comms people, the legal people, the open source people, to make sure that like, hey, all of the checks are done and like this is a positive documentary. And so this was like people at one like at the same time like really wanted it, but at the same time like this is a very weird setup where like this is an external company that is actually like doing the documentary about like a technology from Facebook. And so like there's been like some convincing around this, and my biggest regret is like I wasn't able to convince Jordan to actually cast in the documentary. But like he's been aware of the process and been helping behind the scenes. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's actually a really great intro to like one of our first questions, which is did we try to contact Jordan to participate in the documentary? And yes, absolutely. I think everyone really wanted Jordan to be a part of this documentary. And I think that he was. I think it was a really big part of it. And honestly, I think that all of the things that people said about Jordan uh, kind of represents like just his aura and like his kind of like silent hand in all of this. But yeah, I know a lot of y'all know Jordan better than I do, and I'd love to know if you'd be interested in saying a couple words about his involvement in this documentary, kind of silently.
Yeah, I was going to just echo what you said. I
Yeah.
can do that real quick. I just think that like Jordan was so instrumental to all of this and the reason we're all here today. And regardless of whether or not he wanted to be on camera, saying he's not in the documentary, I don't think is quite accurate. I think there was, as many snippets of him and photos of him as any of us. But he really was just the core of all of this. And none of us would be here without him. So huge thanks to Jordan. And again, regardless of whether or not he wanted to be on camera again, like he is absolutely a part of the core of this community, the core of this movement.
Yeah. I loved seeing Jordan in the clips that we saw. Actually, one of my favorite parts of the whole documentary is that like who is Jordan Walke, and kind of some of that like cross referencing that happens with some of the React core team sense. But yeah, I would say Jordan is definitely a spiritual part of this cast for sure. Let's move on to the next question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And just at any point Jordan decides to join us to say what's up.
Yeah, 100%, always. All right, so we have this next question, which is I think probably a really big one, which is let's see, how do I mark this? Learning on the fly here. Okay. Next big question is, where do you see React in the next 5 to 10 years? That's always kind of like an impossible question, because I can't imagine that anyone saw it being where it is today 5 or 10 years ago. But yeah, what are we thinking about that? I'm alone. I guess I have to answer. I don't know. I mean, it's 5 to 10 years.
I'm gonna join you up here, but I was basically gonna just call Dan or somebody.
All right, we got Dan and Sophie.
I'm certainly let's get Sophie and Dan in.
Well, Michael, first, where do you think React will be in 5 to 10 years?
I didn't know I had to answer questions. Let's see. Okay. I think I'm really excited to see. It feels to me like something that has been important to React that we haven't seen yet is multiple frameworks. I think that there's been kind of like, people have been trying for one, and I think that we're finally getting to the point where it's like we're seeing different ideas in framework land. And I think that's something that I'm really excited about, is seeing kind of like where people take these different ideas of React and like, oh, hey, we really care about this part of like what React can do. We're going to focus on that. And like, we think that this is the future of React. I think just seeing more frameworks that are tailored to different types of applications is something that I'm personally excited about over the next, 5 to 10-ish years. And it feels like it's happening now. But yeah, I guess that's where I would say. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so if you actually think back to 5 years ago, that's right about when we were releasing React 16, which included a full rewrite of the core internals of React without really changing the public API at all. But essentially, all of React was rewritten under the hood. And the reason it was rewritten was to support some of these new longer-term features that we've been talking about for a long time. And those are starting to really get to the point where they're stable. Some of you may know React.start transition, or the new use transition hook, use deferred value. Some of those are now part of React. And then now on the more bleeding edge, React server components are, I think, a really, really exciting development. And now I know we haven't had a lot of like conference talks about them or anything like this. I was actually just talking with Dan and with Andrew earlier this week about when's the right time and what's the right way to tell the story around that. But I think that what you're seeing is actually a lot of the last 5 years of development have been slowly working towards realizing the value of some of this foundational work that was done to React years ago. And I think that over the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of that pay off, and we're going to be able to see some pretty cool new capabilities as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the capabilities that you're most excited about? Because I know that sometimes it's kind of hard for people to envision like the future. And I think that React and the React team has always been extremely like progressive in their thinking. If there's one thing that you're most excited about that's kind of coming down the pipe from a React capability, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because oftentimes we actually do start with the conceptual model and think like, what is the right way to model this? And Sebastian in particular is an absolute expert at this, thinking about like, almost regardless of what we want to do with it, what is the right way to structure this conceptually, and like what gives us the most power in the future, and then trying to see where we can take it from there. I'm personally actually very, very excited about React server components and what they can enable. They really, we had this resurgence of client-side development over the last 10 years where, or maybe it's not even a resurgence, it's a surge in client-side development, where we have these client-driven apps that are very dynamic, very interactive, very responsive. But over that time, we've also introduced some inefficiencies where we're not using the server as well as we possibly can. We're sending down a little more JavaScript than maybe we need to. and trying to take a step back and say like, okay, how do we actually use the best parts of the client and of the server? Because React is not a client-side development framework. I mean, it is, but before that, it's a UI development framework, and we want to use whatever the best tools to do that are. And so, for a while, that was mostly client-side development. Now we're taking a step back and saying, okay, how can we use both the client and the server in a great way, and how can we leverage each of their strengths and make it really easy to move between them? And I think we're going to see some big payoff from that work.
I love that. I love that. Andrew and Dan, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, Dan, go first. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think I'm also pretty excited about server components. By the way, they don't have to run on the server. You can also run them during the build. The name is a bit confusing because there isn't really something exactly like this. I feel like that's what's most exciting to me is the model that we're building there. It has it has sides of different it has some things from old school like PHP and Rails web apps. Like it has this kind of request response model where you just describe the whole thing, but you are on the server, so you can actually take advantage of server features, or you run during the build, so like you can read from the file system. And it's kind of exciting to me to think about like if I write a blog in React, like my blog component can just do like fs.read dir or whatever to like enumerate over. Like it makes sense that React should be able to do this, because really for React, like the idea is just that you compose the user interfaces out of these blocks, and then it doesn't really prescribe that like these blocks have to run on the client. And I think like we've seen some pushback to this, and I think partially it's because like we've built so many client-side apps, but like really invested into that ecosystem. Now like the React team comes along and they're like, why don't you use the server more? And this can be like a bit scary or disruptive, or you just you can't make use of it. But I think of this as kind of an extension. So it's not the client React is like still here, and we're still improving it. But we actually figured out a lot over like the first 10 years about the client React. And people build very rich interfaces with React. But then where you see people run into issues the most, like things like data fetch, and it kind of feels like there's something's not quite right there. And one example I've seen on Twitter, like I was just thinking through, the way you might write like a React component that fetches some data with like a use state and use effect that sets the state. And it's like you have some things that are state, like is the button toggled? Like it's obviously UI state, right? But then like why is the list of comments state? Like it's not really something you interact with the user. It's like it's not really the state of the comments component. So like conceptually it's kind of more like a prop, right? But then but you have to fetch it somehow, right? Like it has to come somewhere. So like it's kind of passed into your component, but what is it passed from? And in this model, it's just passed from the server. Like the server passes you a prop. So you have a server component that like renders your thing, and it gives you this prop, and that's how you get it. And so I think that kind of helped me understand this model, that it's the same unidirectional data flow that you have in React, where you can re-render things, but it also takes the server into that equation, or pre-built results from like your build time. And so it kind of extends that round trip to be asynchronous. And then the primitives we have been building for the past 5 years, what actually makes it work. Because if you just try to make things asynchronous, it like you need some things, like you need a way to show loading indicators. So we have suspense for this. You need a way to like show some pending UI while you don't know what's happening. So we have used transition for this. So we have this like whole model that can now be asynchronous and can take the server or build artifacts or whatever in the equation. And so that is a part of it, like being able to, extend the model to be distributed in a way to take the server and like to run things on the server or to build. But I think the another exciting direction is of course React Native. It's like I think React Native is finally getting over, like it was kind of in an kind of not infancy, but like for a long time it was kind of proving itself. And I think now it's getting into the stage with the new architecture, like not too far from completion. It feels like it's consolidating. And I think like if I look like 5 years from now, like I would like for all of these things to work together. So I'd like to be able to write an app that, can take advantage of the server, that can take advantage of the build time, that is like parts are like cacheable, and also can ship to many platforms with like as least effort as possible. And I'd also like animations. Like we should do React animations. Yeah.
I really like the way that you summarize that around state, because I think state in React has always been a very contentious, confusing topic for a lot of people, particularly managing state, and thinking about this as state across that like server and client boundary is really fascinating. I had not thought about that before. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, I'll be brief. The thing I liked about this documentary, because most of it covers a time before I joined the team, but it was fun to like, I knew a lot of the high level story, but it was fun to like imagine a time when React was the underdog, because most of the time I've been on the team, we have not been. We've been like this incumbent that's been pretty successful. And especially in this last like year or two, I'm finding it very energizing working on React, even though it's like 6 years into me being on the team, because I feel like we're a little bit back in that, not that we're an underdog, I'm not going to say that, but I feel like we're really having to prove to everyone again, like the direction we're going in, like our vision. We're kind of having to repitch React to the world.
That is interesting. I like that phrase. I think maybe Pete said that, you don't have to convince everyone that it's great, but like it's interesting to look at.
Yeah. So maybe there'll be a second one of these, where we get to tell the story again. Like everyone thought we were on the way out, but we proved them wrong. So I think it's a really exciting time. All the stuff that Dan mentioned, like there's a lot of possible things and directions I'm hoping we go in, but I feel like we're just getting started. Like I don't think this is a retrospective so much as just a milestone on the way forward. So
yeah, React Strikes Back, Server Components Edition. Sebastian, good to see you. Did you have something to say on the 5 to 10 year trajectory of React?
Yeah, I might stick to more of the 10-year perspective, at least forward. But I think a lot of what we're doing, and we kind of always approached this as it is a framework for building and shipping a really production app, but it's also a research project. And a lot of things we don't really know where they're going, and we're kind of wrong about details, and we have to reinvent them. But I think the exciting part for me is that we're discovering these concepts, and we're defining concepts in a declarative way. Like we're taking all of this really complicated imperative features that like Facebook has been running in for more than a decade, and we're codifying them into this like simple building blocks and hiding all the imperative and complexity behind it. But you still have to annotate something. Like you have to have a suspense boundary here, you have to declare your data dependencies, your CSS here, and then we could do all this magic. But once we define that, when we say, okay, here are the building blocks that make up a UI, what can we do with that? And what can other people do with that? Like, can we build better IDEs or WYSIWYG editors? It's like Dreamweaver for React coming back now that it can express more. All of these tools, can AI generate UIs, given these building blocks that we discovered? And it might not even be React at that point. Like, who knows how these things play out? But the discovery of that and of that thing, that concept that is inherently there, that's going to pop up in other libraries or going to pop up in the future is still going to be there. And I think that's where we're going to keep focusing, is like, what is the research? How do we discover these parts, and what is the inherent part, and what is the accidental part that is just because of how we code it today?
I love that. I love that. And I love that you're taking the 10-year approach. I'm sure that if it was like 15 or 20, maybe we'd be out there as well. I love that. While I have the three of you on stage, I want to kind of pop up another question, which I thought was really interesting, that kind of refocuses back on some of the early days. So for each team member that's here, what was the first demo that convinced you that React was a real deal? I think that's kind of a theme in React, that moment where it kind of like light bulb moment for everyone. So I'm curious, of those of you that are up here or those kind of waiting backstage, what was that component or that moment for you?
I'll just say really quickly before I leave. To me, it was the server rendering use case. For some reason, that clicked something in my brain that like made it make sense, and that was the first thing I latched onto.
I suppose I can go. I remember I did a bunch of performance tests to compare, see if React could kind of keep up with kind of long lists and massive DOM stuff. I compared to Bolt when we were just, myself and Jordan were trying to decide what to use, and I came up with, I just random and reacted horribly. It was very it was not optimized at all. I showed it to Jordan. He was very angry. He came back an hour later and outperformed Bolt. I don't know what he did in 1 hour, how fast he can type. It was like, okay, fair enough. If that means everything we run into, Jordan can fix it in less than an hour. And he had to walk between buildings as well. So say subtract 10 minutes. I figured he could probably fix anything we ran into, and he did. So that kind of won me over.
Awesome. And Shane, good to have you on the stage. Thank you so much for your contribution to this documentary. It was so fun to hear your perspective on this, and I think your openness to have those hard conversations about React in those early days. I think you don't see, like, I kind of criticize technical teams sometimes for their inability to make strictly technical decisions. There's a lot of kind of hype and feelings involved in a lot of decisions, and I feel like you in this decision you really modeled kind of what it means to make a technical decision, like actually like apply some rigor to the options available, and kind of make the right decision. I'm curious, in those meetings, like, how did it feel at the time? Like when you're going through it, like, did it feel like it was even possible to get there?
No, I mean, it was very messy. It's never, it was always in the back of my mind that, we had 50, 60 people who had spent the last year writing Bolt and finally understood it. And then I was like, if I make the decision, I'm going to thrash all these people. And I was the one who sold them a year ago on using Bolt. And they're going to think, can't this guy just, keep one thought in his head for more than a year? But yeah, like I said in the doc, that Mike Schreffer basically said, like, make the right long-term decision. And kind of like Sebastian, I think he always thinks in the 10-year thing of like, in 10 years, Facebook will be 20 times bigger. And most of these people will be gone. So just make the right decision for, the next 30,000 engineers coming through the company. And so thankfully, he has a much longer horizon for thinking these things through than I did. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, the next 30,000 engineers. That's something that we forget a lot of times. It's usually like whoever's most excited today.
Yeah.
Lee, welcome to the stage.
I love this question, and I feel like I got really early demos from Jordan, because he was React. I don't even know if we were calling it React yet. He was just trying to convince people that this was an idea worth taking seriously. And I actually was sort of, the first couple of times I met with him, I was trying to convince him to stop and do Bolt instead, back to Shane's whole bit about how hard that decision was in the moment. And I think he had come kind of ready with all the things that he knew people thought that React as a conceptual idea just wouldn't be able to do. And so he showed me a demo of an interactive form working. And he's like, this is the thing that's typically really hard to build with like bidirectional data binding. And I was like, yes. And he's like, look how little code there is. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I was like, but there's no way that this is fast. And he says, yes, it is. Check out this demo. And he showed me, I think, a 100 by 100 grid of nodes updating in real time and like clicking all around and having them update as like the proof point that like memoization actually worked, and the whole like algorithm that he had put together to do only the few updates that you needed to do actually yielded performant output. And so he was constantly using that as this like performance benchmark.
I love that. I love it. Yeah, it must have been really fun for you to like see. I mean, it must have been very convincing, right? Because you were convinced. I like one of my favorite parts of the documentary is like you coming in as like the enforcer. We're like, okay, we got to get Lee to like nip this thing in the bud. Like, so it must have been extremely convincing if you went from the
that backfired in the best way.
For sure. I want to invite Adam back up. I saw you for a second about kind of like the convincing demo, and I'd love to hear that moment for you. Welcome to the stage.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, you know, Jing is the person who convinced me actually. Jing and I had been working on chat, and the thing we didn't need convincing on was that re-rendering the UI and taking a functional approach was the right way. We were already doing that with this chat thing. I presented at JSConf like the year before Pete, you know, sort of talking about how we use this approach to fix chat. But I was so burned out on frameworks from like jQuery and Angular and Bolt that we were building, which sort of had already kind of run aground. So I was really skeptical. I was like, we should just write the JavaScript for this. And Jing was like, no, I really think this is going to work. And I got really far just trusting Jing's judgment. So that was easy.
I love that. Now, one of my favorite, one of the many favorite parts of mine in the documentary was, when you were complimenting Jing for her ability to kind of walk into a hostile environment and then walk out with a bunch of people high-fiving each other and patting each other on the back. Like, how many times did you see that through the course of this process, where it was like everyone's against each other, and then you go through Jing and like now everybody is like a team?
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, the dramatic music was all about the open source release, but actually that ads project was just as contentious and difficult in a lot of ways. It was just one of those things where we thought we were almost at the end, and we realized like we could almost see the starting line. This was a huge product for Facebook. It was easy to quantify how well the user interface worked because that metric was dollars. And shipping with a regression there was just really not an option. So it just, I saw a question about like why React moves relatively slowly. The answer is that it gets tested in the fires of Facebook production. Every edge case is reached within moments of its release. So that was her role over and over again when we would have contentions about like how to do this and how to move, what the best way to move forward was. And the reason why was because, Jing is extremely technical, but has a way of bringing everyone with her rather than just sort of saying like, you don't understand what this issue is, just go.
Yeah. It's such an important skill and something that we kind of undervalue, I think, as an industry, where it's like, a bunch of people who want to be brains and not have that moment of empathy where you're like actually listening to people and trying to like gain consensus and, listening. I guess it's something that we we engineers don't often do the best.
Really
caring for people. I love that. I love it. Cool. Before we move on, is there anyone else that wanted to jump on and like talk about that first example that kind of hooked them? And again, thank you, Adam, so much. Appreciate it.
I'll keep it super brief because I think I have a story from right before Jordan gave me the example. I just remember him walking over to my desk and saying that he wanted to talk about this client-side JavaScript framework or this client-side JavaScript thing. And I was responsible at the time, even as somebody who came from the JavaScript community, the open source JavaScript community, I was responsible for telling all new engineers not to write JavaScript. So when Jordan showed up at my desk, I was like, we don't need another one of these. We need to do the opposite. Like, please stop. But I saw a smaller version of the same demo that Lee saw, and I was like, there's something here. There's something to it. So I just had to add that moment in the beginning, like it took a lot for Jordan to overcome all of the people telling him no. And in fact, maybe that's how he knew he was onto something. I don't know. I'd love to hear from him.
For sure. I want to, let's see. There are so, first of all, there's so many questions, and I apologize that we won't be able to get to all of them. We're like rapidly running out of time. But I do want to favor ones that kind of, focus on the era of the documentary, for sure. So let's jump into another one. Shoot. I can't remember what it was, but actually, yeah, we're gonna save another one for later. I can't remember where this was, but it's about that moment that we were kind of like starting to communicate React to the world again about the JSConf in EU in Berlin. I'm curious, people have asked this question of like, what does that look like? What did it feel like in that time, like just after, when you really do start to like pick up the mantle of that hard work and like convincing people one by one. I know that in the documentary, this is a place where Sophie stepped in to be that first kind of outside of React production, builder in React. And so, yeah, just curious, what did that moment of time like feel like with like a little bit more texture around, the events of the time? Pete.
Hey, I think I'm a good person to at least start answering this. So the way that I kind of the analogy that I like to use is if you want to be like a really good runner, right? You can have like perfect technique and like buy the perfect sneakers and have a coach look at your running and make it perfect all the time. But if you don't just like run a lot, like you're never going to be any good, right? And so, what we didn't cover, like I guess as much, is like, we were on IRC and Quora and Stack Overflow and all these different sites like all the time, just like answering lots of people's questions because React was really good technology. Inside of Facebook by the time we had open sourced. But like when it hit like this whole set of diverse use cases and diverse tool chains and all that, there were a lot of issues. And also it was a pretty different mental model. So there was a lot of answering questions, and eventually the questions got easier to answer, and we started like basically copying and pasting answers and links to documentation and stuff like that. And then you kind of like poke your head up after a little while and you're like, wow, like people are just like talking about React and like, Sophie's just building stuff without talking to us. Like, how did that happen? So there was there's a lot of like eating your vegetables, I guess, that happens. It's just grinding through answering people's questions and then trying to learn from those and integrate them into the core documentation or framework or whatever.
Yeah, I think what we saw in the really early days is that people had a very negative, immediate, allergic reaction to seeing JSX. And there was a little bit of discussion of this in the chat, but essentially JSX at Facebook was used to make React feel more familiar to the existing engineers because it was similar to how Bolt.js worked. It was similar to how this other technology, XHP, had worked on the server. And so JSX was what Facebook engineers were used to. It was very natural to say, okay, you have these, you have your angle brackets and these markup in your code. Externally, outside of Facebook, everybody was like, what is this? I hate it. This is so weird. I don't want HTML inside my JavaScript. Like, why would I possibly want that? And so people had this very negative reaction to it, including me. When I first saw React, I was like, this React thing looks pretty cool. JSX, I don't know about that. And when I first started using React for the first couple of days, I was like, I'm not going to use JSX. I'm just going to, write React.dom.div,
Yes.
I think it was back in the day. But then, I after a few days, I was like, okay, I do sort of see how JSX is helpful here. But I think what you saw is that people had this very negative initial reaction, but then once they actually started to use React, started to try it and give it a chance, Pete had this line, give it 5 minutes. Once people actually sat down and said like, okay, is this good? Does this actually work for me? Then they found that it really did. And, like Pete says, there was a ton of work to try to bring people along and try to answer their questions. When I had started using React at Khan Academy and brought my coworkers along with me, the number one complaint I had was not actually anything about React itself, but they were like, whenever I have any sort of question or problem, or I get an error message and I don't know what it means, I Google it and there are no results. And they're like, that's really frustrating because then I don't know how to solve my problems. And so for, I think about a couple of years, I said I said to myself, how can we solve this problem? And I said, well, normally when you Google where do you find answers? It's usually Stack Overflow. And so I said, okay, I'm going to answer every single question asked on Stack Overflow that's tagged with React.js. And I did that for about 2 years and built up a pretty large library of answers. And then I eventually got tired of it. But by that point, there were other people who were answering as well.
Yeah, I love that as a really important step for kind of building community, is filling that gap, right? And I think, we saw it in the documentary, there's this like really important step where it's like people just are asking questions and not finding answers. And I think, we've seen it in groups after React as well. Like the people who are best at building community are the people who are like just out there talking with people, like, like you said, Pete, like doing the work, showing the examples, building real apps and convincing people one by one. I had a question and I lost it. Sorry, Christopher.
Maybe
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things around this era that like people don't often remember, but the JavaScript ecosystem was you would literally like put the JavaScript inside like of your script tag and that's it. Like people were like barely minifying stuff. Like nobody was using linters, nobody was using like bundlers, nobody was using like new like the JavaScript variants. And the thing that React, because we use JSX, like we basically had to have like basically a code transform. And so now that you have a code transform, you need to have a bundler. And so like Pete was like, hey, Webpack is amazing. And like Webpack grew like with React. And ESLint, now that you have like a bundler and like all of this stack, you're basically like, it's much easier to add one more thing. And so like ESLint also grew like crazy with React. And then we've seen like Flow and TypeScript. So in practice, like TypeScript won, but TypeScript, like because we have all of this infrastructure, like TypeScript was able to grow with React. And so this is the thing that like for me, I'm the most proud of, is that not only like React, the library like worked, but like the whole ecosystem of JavaScript like became like way better because it's like React was enabling all of this. And now if you look at like Vue and like Vite and like all of this, like you're seeing a lot of innovation, like ESBuild, like a lot of innovation in this area that before React like just didn't exist. Like, Angular was basically at its own module loader. And so that was like, yeah, something I don't think a lot of people realize, but was part of the journey of React.
Yeah. And that actually leads to another question that we want to try and answer today, which is like, React has kind of famously been very focused on a single piece of the stack. Like it hasn't had like a built-in router, hasn't had, I mean, beyond, set state at the beginning and, use state and use reducer now, hasn't had kind of like a Flux like or Redux like, state management system and whatnot. I'm curious, kind of counterintuitively, that seems to have been part of the success of React. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Like, was that important to the success? Was it like kind of indifferent to the success? And I think even Sebastian made a point at the end of the documentary about kind of intentionally leaving some things out for people to fill that void. So I'm curious, like, how important was that?
Tom, I want to answer for this.
Yeah, I'll start because I have a ton of thoughts on this, but I'm sure others do as well. So please join me on stage. In the very beginning, React needed to be unopinionated because nobody was using it for an entire app. It had to be shoehorned into lots and lots of different places that had their own routers, that had their own, component libraries, that had their own everything. One of the first things, I think the only code I ever wrote for React was creating an escape hatch so we could embed our like Facebook widgets inside of it. It had escape hatches everywhere and it needed to be embedded into lots of different places. So in order to like actually be tried out, it needed to be really unopinionated in the early days. But then something happened. As people started using it more and more, they started using it outside of the context of an existing app. And now they don't actually want infinite flexibility. They want to be told kind of how to do things. And so there's a nice segue into, Create React app and the meta frameworks and things that came next. But I think it was very important in the early days for it to be unopinionated. It probably wouldn't exist today if it had everything built in.
Love that. Yeah. I saw Dan. I saw you next, so I'll put you up there.
Yeah, I think there's like always this debate of like, is React a library or a framework? I'm not actually going to answer that right now, but the thing that I saw that I thought is interesting about React's approach to this is, I think a lot of people, like early on, we were talking a lot about minimal API surface area, and I think some people might take it like too literally, as it like, oh, it has to be like 5 methods, something like this. But I think I've kind of gained like a deeper appreciation for maybe the design philosophy of React is there are obvious gaps in, like how to do data fetching, or how to do styling, how to do animations, how to do routing, that we don't really answer, but there are, I think like part of the strategy is like, first, if you don't know the answer, like don't do it. So you kind of leave a hole, you leave a space for the ecosystem to try different things to see, how people can kind of fit it in. But eventually maybe there is a winner or like a solution that is fairly popular. And at that point, a lot of libraries, they decide to, okay, we're taking that in. So we're saying like, that's the winner. This is the current favorite way of doing it. So we're just gonna add it to the library. And I think we generally still resist that. So even if there is a winner, even if there is like, there is a way of doing it that seems, fine. From the way I understand it, maybe Sebastian can correct me, we really add something to React when we feel like we've understood how to make this thing compose the same way that components compose. So we really care about this. Like the most important thing about React is, I think Shane said it in the like that you can take like this person can work on this person can work on this, and when you put them together, it still works. Like it doesn't fall apart, and it's actually really hard to do in the API design to achieve that. And I think the features that we take into React, and I think we would, like with time, we will kind of take more features into React, are the ones that empower like the whole abstraction to work together and kind of raises it for all the features. So even if something is popular, like for example, Redux, that might not be like the thing that we add just because it's popular. Like it really needs to integrate into the whole thing and make all the other features more powerful because of it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think Andrew, I saw you next, and then Sebastian. Oh, okay.
I think Seb was next.
Thanks.
You can go first.
Well, I was gonna flip the question around, because it's interesting to see what is in React, right? And did all of that have to be in React? Should we have done the opposite, right? The early conversations were more about, can we make React modular? Can we have a different DOM diffing library from a different component models that can all play together, or should this like server rendering be a separate thing, or should what about React Native? Is that its own thing, or is it something that lives in React Native, or is it something that lives in React itself? And it could have gone, it's kind of arbitrary how we ended up with this particular set of features. It's just what we happen to know. And we did evaluate a lot of like, should this be something that we delete? A lot of what I did early on was just like delete features from React. If it was better off living somewhere else. So it could have been smaller, it could have been better, but I think we realized that like what there was needed, all of it was needed to create this sort this ecosystem. And then as time went on, we learned more and more, and we could incorporate more and more of those features into the core.
Yeah, I feel like something that's always been very interesting about React is the protection around keeping it simple. And I think that a lot of times, you see libraries that just kind of continue to just accrete all of these features because they fix exactly one use case and they seem useful at the time and whatnot. And there were a bunch of questions and comments about the stability or maybe like the slow movingness of React. But I'm curious, it sounds like that is kind of the reason that it has succeeded. The reason that it's kind of stood the test of time is the fact that you are very protective about making sure that it is absolutely necessary and that the abstraction or feature can't be pushed off to a different layer, I guess.
There's also the question of specialization, right? Like you can be the best at one thing, and you can be the best at every particular thing, but there's a lot of value in every one of those. Using some shared platform is greater than having the best of it for a single task, right? And that I think it's a lot of the reason why it's hard to incorporate things too and expand is because we have so many different users with very different use cases, and it's easy, I think, to focus on one niche when you're in there, and we get frustrated, why is React not just fixing this part? And then someone else is the opposite, right? And so we always try to look at the entire spectrum and see if there's some solution that can help all, and then bring that in. If it's good enough for all of it, then we're bringing it in. And sometimes that means redesigning it. Sometimes it means sacrificing what is best tool for its specific specialized task.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. Andrew.
Yeah, I'll be brief again. I think Dan kind of covered this idea, but I'm expecting that in future years, it's going to continue to be kind of a debate of where does React sit in this library framework spectrum? I don't really like any of these words, honestly. They really only mean something if we can agree on the meaning. I do expect you'll probably see slightly more APIs or features being trickled into React, but it'll definitely be a delicate balance. I am a little bit more confident saying, though, that you will see us start to have more opinions on architecture, even if we don't literally build the feature into React itself. That's kind of like what Suspense is. Suspense isn't a full data fetching framework. It's these primitives that allow you to build things on top. The idea there is that, one way to think about this is that apps are more similar than they are different. That might be a slightly controversial statement. I sometimes get in trouble when I say things like this on Twitter, but there's a lot of things that, does there really need to be two different ways to do routing in React apps, or does there really need to be two different ways to do data fetching? Right now we benefit from lots of different libraries, but I'm expecting as the years go on, we're going to see more convergence. Yeah. Even if there's still competing libraries, I think the patterns and the architecture is going to start to converge, which you're seeing already.
Nice. I love that. Love it. Yeah, and I think it is that's a truism that we don't want to face a lot of the times. We like thinking that the thing that we're building is unique, a unique snowflake that nobody's ever thought of before. But they are a lot more similar than they are different. Cool. I have I guess one question that I want to close on. I think I'm going to invite Tom back up because Tom, I've always really appreciated your insight. Thank you so much, Andrew. There's a question about competition in this space and competition between libraries and whatnot. And I know something that has attracted me to React from the beginning is that it always felt non-competitive, right? That it was an exercise in just trying to chase after the right ideas and kind of build things that were practically useful to people. And so I guess to the question of competition in the UI development framework space, how do you see competition, like, I guess, between React and the other libraries, kind of over the next, like right now and over the next few years?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it comes up a lot because I think everybody wants to learn what framework authors and team members think of other frameworks, and it's like this salacious drama. It just was never that way with React. You know, when we open source React, a lot of people would say like, "Oh, how did you feel?" One of the questions was like, "How did you feel about the competition with Angular in the early days?" That wasn't it. We didn't feel like we were competing with Angular. We felt like we had something that solved a series of problems for us, or at least at a high level, let us trade off one set of problems for a different, better, more exciting set of problems. And we just wanted to share that with the world. So I think it's common for this tribalism to form and for people to want to get on stage and say, I've solved it, you should use my thing. And I think one of the things that actually made React so successful and so long-standing and something that has sustained the test of time is that it didn't see itself as being, you know, in competition with lots of other frameworks. And the last thing I'll say about this is, if we ever live in a world where React is the only way to do things, I think that's bad. I don't want that to be the end state here, because we learn so much from each other, and we, you know, together what we're doing with all of these different strategies, all of these different solutions, is we're moving everyone forward. And so, you know, I think competition is a powerful force. I think collaboration is a far more powerful force. And while I love to see healthy competition, I don't think we ever framed up, you know, what we were doing as, you know, being in competition with anyone else.
Love that. Christopher?
Yeah. And in the early day, like one thing that I really annoyed me is on the IRC log. So like Ricky Monroe, like just send me like the IRC log. I'm seeing like a consistent thing where like people are saying, hey, Angular is bad, and like why, like, can you tell me like why React is better? And I always like was upset about this, because I'm like, Angular is actually really good. Like there's no piece of technology that like becomes so successful without actually being good. And so like I was always trying to figure out, okay, why like do people use Angular, like use React and not Angular, and try to learn, hey, what are the things that like Angular could be doing better, or like what are the different paradigms we should be using. And so this was for Angular, and we actually organized like meetings between the React team and the Angular team on Google Campus. And so we actually knew each other pretty well. And like at some point, the Angular manager was actually like joined Facebook for work on other projects. So like the people that behind those frameworks are not like competing and not talking to each other. We actually like know each other pretty well. Like I've been playing a lot of video game with Ivan Yu, and and we actually get inspired by Vue around like all the documentation. Like when the Vue docs came out, like they were like way better than React. And so we actually like spent a lot of time like improving the React documentation, because like Vue's documentation was seen as better. And oh, now like Vite is helping us having a faster bundler, and like we are all like, the way I think it is like we're all working together to make the ecosystem better. And it's not like, and I really hate like when the people from the outside like wants to pit each other against each other. And I'm like, no, I don't want like to have like a battle between like Angular and Vue and React. Like, no, like we should all figure out how we can do better, because we're in the marketplace. So
I love that. Yeah. Thank you, Christopher. Dan?
Yeah, I wanted to add that I think maybe I do feel a little bit more competitive over time than before. But I think it's not really about competition as in like I want everyone to use React or like, you know, it's not about like the numbers or adoption or something like this. It's actually a little bit different. And I think so if you think about the idea of React, why, you know, why did it happen at that particular time, right? Like we're lucky to have Jordan have been, you know, like working on that specific thing and like having that specific background, having like all of those different, you know, like different influences that that help him find this thing. But really, with a lot of these ideas, it's or like with invention, it's more about finding, not like building. It's more about like finding those trade-offs or those rules that make everything come together. And I think it could have happened earlier. Like, why, like we discovered MVC, which was like a predominant way to build user interfaces, like 30 years or maybe even more before React. But why couldn't React have been discovered like 30 years ago? I think it could have. I think like, and maybe it was like, maybe somebody came up with this idea and like sat on it for a few days, and then they just didn't tell anyone, or like they thought it's not workable and forgot about it. And so I think the kind of competition that I care about is, how do we make sure we don't miss, the next of these things? And if that's what we're trying to do, is like, if Sebastian has an idea, like somebody else has an idea, and we think it's really good, and maybe people don't believe us yet, or maybe it's not yet like pragmatic enough, but what we care about is the idea surviving, because if we think that it's another one of those things that we want to add to kind of the humanities toolbox for UI development, we really like, we win not when React is the most popular thing and then like everybody uses it. When we win, when the next generation of tools that replace React have that idea in them, because then it just becomes, it's like, yeah, everybody knows it. We don't have to rediscover this thing again. And that's really the goal, is like, for every good idea that we have, we want it to become part of the next generation. And that is, and we will compete to get good ideas out and to try our best to, to help people recognize them. But sometimes we're going to be wrong.
I love that. And I think that that's a really great place to close. Like that, we're trying to find those just like nuggets of truth that the future can build upon. And I'm really excited to see that play out over the next like handful of years, because I think that there is a lot to love there. And we have so many great apps. So yeah, I think we're going to close this up. We've already gone like 17 minutes over our time. So I appreciate all of your patience and great questions. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them, but this was an absolutely fabulous time. I'm honored to be a part of it. And so I thank the Honeypot team for just making this documentary and making it possible to hang out. And honestly, I was just thinking about how like this is probably, I mean, with the exception of our preview, probably like the first time that all of these people have been in the same place, which is just wild. So you're a part of history today, and we're glad that you're here. Thank you so much. One last time, a big shout out to the entire cast: Adam Wolf, Andrew Clark, Christopher Chedeau, Dan Abramov, David Nolan, Lee Byron, Pete Hunt, Sebastian Mark Boge, Shane O'Sullivan, Sophie Alpert, Tom Aquino, Tony Caspero, and Ida Bekla. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this. Yeah, we just hope that you enjoy this documentary for a long time to come. And yeah, we'll see you online. Have fun, everybody. Bye.